up a good show. Yeah. Thanks to I'm Greg Gutfeld. I love you, America.
President Trump as the so-called divider-in-chief. Good evening, I'm John Scott. This is the Fox Report. Biden hosted a rally this afternoon. Joe Biden officially kicks off his 2020 campaign. The former vice president called for unity and slammed President Trump as the so-called divider-in-chief. Good evening, I'm John Scott. This is the Fox Report. Biden hosted a rally this afternoon in Philadelphia to jumpstart his bid for the White House. He touted his record of bipartisanship in the Senate and urged supporters to put aside what he calls angry politics, telling them the path forward is together.
If the American people want the president to add to our division, lead with a clenched fist, a closed hand, a hard heart, to demonize your opponent, to spew hatred. They don't need me. They got President Donald Trump. I'm ready to go for our country, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, a different path.
Biden is the frontrunner in a primary race that has now grown to nearly 24 candidates. The former vice president said today he would not attack his Democratic opponents. Brian Yennis has more from Philadelphia. Brian.
John, good evening. In the 1976 film Rocky Balboa famously ran up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art behind me as he trained for the biggest heavyweight fight of his life. Well, today, former Vice President Joe Biden spoke at a park in front of those very steps as he launched the biggest political fight for his life. Now, over here in a nearly 30-minute speech, Biden spoke about how he wants to unite the country and restore its soul. He promised again that he will not attack or speak ill of other Democratic candidates in this campaign because there's only one thing that matters, and that's defeating the man he called the divider-in-chief.
We need a president who's willing to lead, who will insist on dramatic change for the sake of our children. Folks, let me tell you something. The single most important thing we have to accomplish to get this done, the single most important thing we have to accomplish is defeat Donald Trump.
Biden, born in Scranton, just 2 hours away from Philadelphia, is pitching himself as the candidate that can win back blue-collar working-class voters that Trump won in 2016 in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, states which propelled Trump to the White House. Now, today, Biden spoke about the need for a public health option and free community college, and then he attacked Trump, saying the current good state of the economy has nothing to do with the president.
I know President Trump likes to take credit for the economy and the economic growth and the low unemployment numbers, but just look at the facts, not the alternative facts. President Trump inherited an economy from Obama-Biden administration that was given to him, just like he inherited everything else in his life.
The latest Quinnipiac poll here in Pennsylvania has Biden with an 11-point lead over President Trump. That's the largest lead any Democrat has over the president in the pivotal battleground state, a state that Trump won in 2016 by less than 1 percentage point. Now, meanwhile, the latest Fox News polling shows Biden's lead over the other Democratic contenders is growing. He's at 35%, up from 31% in March. Senator Bernie Sanders is a distant second behind Biden with 17%, down from 23%. Now, John, Sanders and others have criticized Biden for not being progressive enough and for being too willing to work with Republicans. And to that end, Biden said today, well, compromise is not a dirty word and consensus is not weakness. John?
Brian Yennis. Brian, thank you. And Fox will have plenty more coverage of the 2020 race coming up tomorrow. One of the rising stars in the Democratic field, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, will take part in a Fox News town hall. Chris Wallace hosts the event live from New Hampshire tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Chris also will speak with Minnesota Democrat Senator and 2020 candidate Amy Klobuchar in an exclusive interview on Fox News Sunday. Check your local listings for the time it runs in your area. President Trump, meanwhile, is having a quiet weekend in Washington following a busy week of trade decisions. The president ramped up sanctions on China, but then lifted tariffs on Mexico and Canada to help pave the way for passage of a new North American trade deal. Ellison Barber is at the White House with more. Ellison.
Hi, John. On Friday, President Trump announced that the U.S. had reached a deal with Canada and Mexico to lift major tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Canada and Mexico agreed to get rid of retaliatory tariffs they'd imposed on U.S. goods. President Trump says he is now hopeful that this is a sign soon the trade deal to replace NAFTA, the USMCA, will be ratified.
We have a great relationship with Canada and the Prime Minister. We have a great relationship, but they've been charging us extremely high tariffs, as much as 285% or more for our agricultural products. Hopefully Congress will approve the USMCA quickly, and then the great farmers and manufacturers and steel plants will make our economy even more successful than it already is.
In a statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the agreement with Canada and Mexico encouraging. She went on to say, quote, "It is my hope that the Trump administration will work with the rest of our allies to refocus on standing up to China's trade cheating instead of recklessly antagonizing our allies and inviting retaliation on American workers and goods." House Democrats will continue to work with the U.S. Trade Representative to address our priorities of ensuring the USMCA proposal meets our standards for jobs and wages, prescription drug prices, environmental protection, and the central issue of strong enforcement. Right now, trade talks with China remain stalled. The back and forth this week rattled investors. The Dow had its worst day since January after China announced their intention to raise tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. goods. Retaliation for President Trump's latest tariff increase on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. China's foreign ministry spokesperson says if there's going to be any sort of trade deal, the U.S. needs to show sincerity. But administration officials say it was China who initially failed to keep their word.
Firstly, they need to talk with principle. There must be mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefit. Secondly, they must keep their word. They cannot wield their power capriciously.
There's legitimate anxiety in the farm community, obviously over low prices compounded by the trade disruption, certainly. And that's why President Trump is committed to support the farmers in the meantime. It's unfortunate that China decided to backtrack on some of the commitments.
The latest punch in this fight has to do with China's telecom giant Huawei. This week, the Trump administration effectively barred sales from the company after the Commerce Department placed Huawei on its entity list, meaning that they need special permission to buy American technology. Commerce Department said they made the decision to place Huawei on that list after they had evidence and information that Huawei was engaging in activities that were contrary to U.S. national security and foreign policy interest. John?
Ellison Barber at the White House. Thank you. U.S. diplomats warn commercial airlines flying over the Persian Gulf their planes could be misidentified amid escalating tensions with Iran. The Trump administration recently ordered warships and bombers to the region in response to a perceived threat. Here is Senate Armed Services Committee member Kevin Cramer.
A number of things that are happening. The most important is that the United States is positioning assets in a way that designed to deter without escalation, including, obviously diplomacy is part of that. But it is important to issue the appropriate warnings to be careful, because what you don't want to do is have an unintended consequence due to an unnecessary response to something.
Our national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has more.
John, some lawmakers received a classified briefing from U.S. security officials on Friday, explaining some of the intelligence that U.S. national security officials say showed Iran was preparing to strike U.S. forces using proxy forces in Iraq and possible missiles on board ships. With the USS Abraham Lincoln now in the Gulf, U.S. officials say they have seen signs the missiles that they say Iran had loaded onto at least 2 ships have been removed. Foreign passport holders working with ExxonMobil have started evacuating an oil field in Basra in southern Iraq, which follows the ordered evacuation of U.S. Embassy personnel from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. That warning to commercial airliners flying over the wider Persian Gulf is a grim reminder that 30 years ago, the U.S. mistook an Iranian passenger jet for a warplane while protecting commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Navy fired 2 surface-to-air missiles, killing all 290 people on board. President Trump pushed back on news reports that he is angry with his national security team.
And they put out so many false messages that Iran is totally confused. I don't know, that might be a good thing.
The president has offered to negotiate with the Iranians, a message delivered through the Swiss who represent the U.S. in Tehran. The U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal a year ago and listed Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist group, raising fears in Baghdad that Iraq could become the site of a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran. Secretary of State Pompeo reportedly told Iraqi leaders, "You are either with us or stand out of the way." And a senior administration official briefing reporters last night said, "This is an incredibly serious situation. We take it seriously, and I can assure you they should too." John?
Jennifer Griffin reporting. Jennifer, thank you.
A lot of the answers have been inadequate, and I've also found that some of the explanations I've gotten don't hang together. So in a sense, I have more questions today than I did when I first started. People have to find out what the government was doing during that period. If we're worried about foreign influence, for the very same reason, we should be worried about whether government officials abuse their power and put their thumb on the scale.
Attorney General William Barr speaks exclusively to Fox News, telling Bill Hemmer he plans to get to the bottom of the origins of the Mueller probe. Barr also says he has no objections to Special Counsel Robert Mueller testifying before Congress. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington with more. So why did Attorney General Barr say these investigations into the investigators are so important, Garrett?
Well, John, you heard there a little bit how Bill Barr is concerned about the possibility that government officials abuse their power to potentially influence the election in the scope or within the scope of the Trump-Russia probe. And in an interview with Fox News, the Attorney General stressed that he doesn't know if that happened, but he did say that he hasn't gotten the clear answers that he was hoping for as he has tried to find out, which is why he believes that it is crucial to investigate exactly what happened.
No one's really looked at it. I think there's a misconception out there that we know a lot about what happened. The fact of the matter is, Bob Mueller did not look at the government's activities. He was looking at whether or not the Trump campaign had conspired with the Russians. But he was not going back and looking at the counterintelligence program.
Yeah, Barr is getting a lot of heat from Democrats for his investigations, with many suggesting that his goal is to cast doubt on the special counsel's findings in order to protect President Trump. The Attorney General told Bill Hemmer he is not surprised Democrats are targeting him, said he expected it, and that they are likely doing it because they are worried about what his investigations into the origins of the Trump-Russia probe might turn up. John?
But, Garrett, it's not just Democrats who are going after the Attorney General these days, though.
Yeah, this afternoon, Republican Congressman Justin Amash went after both President Trump and his AG. In a lengthy Twitter tweet, the Michigan lawmaker accused President Trump of impeachable conduct and said the Attorney General deliberately misrepresented Mueller's report, tweeting in part, "In comparing Barr's principal conclusions, congressional testimony, and other statements to Mueller's report, it is clear that Barr intended to mislead the public about Special Counsel Robert Mueller's analysis and findings." He continues, "Barr's misrepresentation are significant but often subtle, frequently taking the form of sleight of hand qualifications or logical fallacies, which he hopes people will not notice." Now, Amash echoing there what many top Democrats have said in their own criticism. And while he has been openly critical of President Trump's decisions on a number of occasions in the past, he is now the first Republican in the House to publicly come out in support of impeachment proceedings against the president. John?
Garrett Tenney. Garrett, thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll have more on this when Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author Judy Miller joins us later in the hour. We'll discuss whether Democrats have what they need to begin an impeachment proceeding against President Trump, and would they actually attempt it. Hundreds of migrants are being flown from the southern border to temporary holding facilities in California, a move border officials are making to cope with the massive surge of undocumented families arriving from Mexico and Central America. While the move has sparked outcry among some communities slated to receive the immigrants, some lawmakers argue it had to be done.
The border states are being overrun and really don't even have facilities. They're trying to find more facilities in Maricopa County, but the churches, the NGOs, City of Phoenix has even told us they don't have any more resources. The City of Phoenix is a big city. The metro area is about 5 million people, and we are overtaxed. And so we need to spread this out throughout the country, and we also need to take care of the border and secure that border.
Jeff Paul has details on that. Jeff.
John, border officials are still working out which states could be receiving migrants, but we're learning Florida, as of now, is off the list. The plan received backlash from local and state officials, namely Governor Ron DeSantis, who is a vocal supporter of President Trump.
We cannot accommodate in Florida just dumping unlawful migrants into our state. I think it'll tax our resources, the schools, the health care, law enforcement, state agencies.
Earlier in the week, sheriffs in Broward and Palm Beach County said Border Patrol notified them their communities could start seeing up to 1,000 migrants per month beginning in 2 weeks. Palm Beach County Sheriff Brick Bradshaw at the time said flying in migrants was not humanitarian. Today, Sheriff Bradshaw says because of everybody's efforts, they were able to stop what had appeared to be a crisis for the community. But border officials could still send migrants to other communities throughout the country. The idea is to fly migrants and their families away from the resource-strapped and overcrowded shelters along the southern border. They'd be flown into cities across the country as they wait for their immigration court hearings. Missouri Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who is on the House Homeland Security Committee, told Fox News he's not against migrants coming into his community, but there needs to be a specific plan before that happens.
I think Kansas City and many other cities would be welcoming. I certainly would be, personally, and would use whatever influence I had to create a welcoming environment. I'm not sure that without a strategy and without knowing, sometime in advance for preparation, that we're going to be of any advantage to them.
Border Patrol in San Diego confirms migrants are being flown to that sector right now from Texas. What's unclear, John, is what other cities could be included next. John.
Jeff Paul, Los Angeles. Thank you. This week in our special investigation into the terrible world of human trafficking, we examine how people get sucked into these horrors at a young age. And severe storms target the central U.S., and it's not over yet. The storm system's still very active, with many states affected. The forecast next.
Gutfeld show, de Blasio versus Trump, Trump versus Iran, Alyssa versus sex, Southwest versus a passenger who made a joke, Victoria's Secret versus network TV, and Beto versus the barber chair. Brace yourself for the greatest hour on TV, 10 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it!
Severe weekend weather slams the heartland. Take a look at just a few of the dozens of tornadoes touching down in the area this weekend. And those twisters have left behind damage from Texas to Nebraska. Jackie Heinrich joins us with more. Jackie?
Well, John, we're just beginning to see the scope of the damage, and the number of people without power is rapidly climbing. Today is expected to be the worst day in a week-long severe weather track, with as many as 80 million people in the path of the storm across 18 states. From Kansas, powerful dash cam video shows a semi-truck flipped over with what appears to be the beginnings of a tornado in the distance. In Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Kansas, 8 tornadoes were reported within just 2 hours today. Across the south central U.S., there were more than 30 preliminary tornado reports. So far, 1 tornado was confirmed in Oklahoma, injuring at least 1 person, and 2 more confirmed in Texas. In Abilene, strong winds forced a nursing home to evacuate. Several homes and businesses were damaged there. And in Ballinger and Silver Valley, more destruction. Winds downed trees and left power lines on streets. A baseball stadium and water tower were also hit, leaving some homes now flooded. Right now, power outages are impacting cleanup efforts, with more than 83,000 people left in the dark in Texas, 31,000 in Arkansas, 16,000 in Nebraska, 13,000 in Oklahoma, and 8,000 in Missouri. Airports are snarled across the country, with nearly 2,000 flights delayed nationwide and about 400 cancellations. Dallas-Fort Worth is impacted the most, with about a quarter of their flights delayed. Forecasts show the areas hardest hit by the storm could be in for a second second round of storms on Monday and Tuesday. Right now, the storm is moving northeast, with first crossing Texas and Iowa with some high winds and hail, then moving into eastern and central Kansas with heavy rain and thunderstorms. Sunday, major cities like Detroit, Chicago, and Indianapolis face the biggest threat, with warnings of floods and winds up to 70 miles an hour. The National Weather Service issuing a warning to Kansas City after the region enjoyed some sun and warm weather over the last few days, tweeting, "We'd say welcome to summer, but that streak will end today." People in the path of the storm are being urged to stay off the roads and keep alert for rapidly changing weather conditions. John.
Incredible and scary footage of those tornadoes. Jackie Heinrich, thank you.
Thanks.
And the severe weather isn't over yet. AccuWeather meteorologist Dajia Swad is here with a look at what's in store. Dajia.
John, still a very active night, and even as we head into this upcoming week, we will be talking about strong storms to come across the plains. On the radar for the last 3 hours, we've been noticing drier air backing in towards West Texas and starting to make its way into central and even eastern portions. But there are still some nasty storms rolling through Arkansas as well as into Missouri. Wind gusts will still be bringing plenty of damage. Tornado watch in effect until 8 p.m. Central Time for Little Rock, Shreveport, Louisiana, and as well as Austin, Texas. We will start to see some relief as the system continues to press its way a little further to the east. And by tomorrow, our concern will really be across Detroit, including Chicago, Columbus, and towards Buffalo, Pittsburgh. You could even see some storms. This is a slight threat zone, meaning not spotty, but scattered potential for some severe weather. Once again, Chicago, Detroit, Toledo, Indianapolis, as well as Cincinnati, going to be looking at the likelihood for hail, flooding downpours, and the likelihood for an isolated tornado also on the table. Wind gusts going to be up to 70 miles per hour. That is going to lead to more power outages across the country. Now into your Monday, we'll be tracking out yet another powerful piece of energy coming out of the west that will allow for Oklahoma City as well as Lubbock, Texas, Dallas, and to Tuesday and Little Rock to see another round of severe weather. And just want to reiterate, in Oklahoma City, Lawton, Oklahoma, as well as Woodward, Oklahoma, on Monday, we are looking at a moderate threat, meaning intense storms very possible and the likelihood for tornadoes. It's the perfect time right now to get that plan of action going as we get ready for that next round of severe weather. John?
Good advice. Dajia Swad from AccuWeather. Thank you. Louisiana is poised to become the latest state to pass a so-called fetal heartbeat bill. That measure would ban abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards is prepared to sign the legislation, which is expected to pass a final vote in the state house. Meanwhile, Missouri lawmakers have passed a bill banning abortions after 8 weeks. The state's Republican governor expected to sign it in the coming days. As we mark nearly 20 years since the tragic death of John F. Kennedy Jr., a new Fox Nation special is shedding some light on the night his private plane disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean on its way to Martha's Vineyard. It's very easy for a pilot to lose control.
JFK Jr. was only about halfway done with getting his instrument rating, so he wasn't fully trained to fly solely by reference to his instruments. And so if you're not trained to do that, and you don't have a horizon, the balance functions in your inner ear begin to play tricks with you. It appeared from the evidence of the recorded radar data that his flight path mirrored a classic spatial disorientation.
The big story, the disappearance of JFK Jr., now available exclusively on Fox Nation. Pope Francis meeting with hundreds of journalists in Rome today. What the pontiff had to say about the importance of a free press, coming up.
The thing that's interesting about this is that this was handled at a very senior level of these departments. It wasn't handled in the ordinary way that investigations or counterintelligence activities are conducted. It was sort of an ad hoc small group, and most of these people are no longer with the FBI or the CIA or the other agencies involved.
That's the Attorney General William Barr saying he wants to look into the decisions of the top officials running our intelligence community in the closing months of the Obama administration as he investigates the origins of the Mueller probe. I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. We're just past the bottom of the hour, and if you're just joining us, Barr spoke exclusively to Fox News' Bill Hemmer. He's tapped U.S. Attorney John Durham to lead an investigation into the origins of the Mueller probe, which would cover the time period between Election Day in early November and President Trump's inauguration more than 2 months later. Let's bring in Judy Miller, adjunct fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, and also a Fox News contributor. So, Judy, the foundations of the Mueller report, the very reason for its existence, are questionable, apparently, in the minds of the Attorney General.
Well, this is true. And in the Attorney General, John, the president has finally found the Attorney General that he has wanted and that he didn't have in Jeff Sessions. This is a man who has done exactly what he said he was going to do, which is give the broadest possible interpretation of presidential authority and power. The Congress knew that, the Senate knew that when they confirmed him, and Bill Barr is doing pretty much what he said he was going to do, much to the chagrin of Democrats in both the House and the Senate.
We've all heard a lot about the Steele dossier compiled by that former British spy who found a bunch of salacious allegations, shall we say, against President Trump. The Attorney General has a lot of questions about how that came to be used. Here, listen here.
It's a very unusual situation to have opposition research like that, especially one that on its face had a number of clear mistakes. I'm not sure what role it played, but that's something we have to look at.
Do you smell a rat in this at this point?
I don't know if I'd describe it a rat. I would just say that the answers I'm getting are not sufficient.
Many of Bob Mueller's supporters say that, there was a lot of information, FISA court filings and so forth, beyond the Steele dossier that allowed them to surveil members of the Trump campaign. But the Attorney General seems to suggest that dossier played a huge part in this.
Yes, he does. And I don't really know what this is based on, but we do know that the Republicans have alleged time and again that the origins of the Russia investigation really need to be looked at. This has become a Republican talking point. Now, I think we're going to have some answers to why Bill Barr is taking such a hard position when Michael Horowitz's report, he's the Inspector General of the Justice Department, issues his report, which we're all waiting for in June, that begins to look at how this investigation into the Trump campaign began. We know that the Russians were spying. We know that there was an effort to meddle in our elections. The FBI is saying that in and of itself was grounds to investigate who in the Trump campaign might be colluding, might be cooperating. But Bill Barr seems to feel that there is perhaps was something amiss, something untoward, and he wants to put these allegations to rest one way or another. Now, Bob Mueller did look at the investigation itself insofar as he concluded that there was no collusion by the Trump campaign, but he wasn't asked to look at the origins of the investigation. And so that's what's coming under scrutiny now. And one way or another, John, I think we have to get to the bottom of these allegations and assertions because Republicans keep bringing them up. Democrats keep saying this is a diversionary tactic. But in the next month and two, we're going to know a great deal more about how and why this investigation of the Trump campaign began. And by the way, we just have to remember that Mueller himself did not say anything about that one way or another, except that Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, testified recently on Capitol Hill and said that what was going on, the investigation of Donald Trump was not, quote, spying, because he said a court-authorized investigation of whether or not someone in the campaign is colluding with the Russians is authorized surveillance. Right. It's not spying. And he also denied that the FBI had done anything wrong. Yeah. But we're going to see.
Former FBI head James Comey got into a bit of finger-pointing this week with John Brennan, the former head of the CIA. Some observers said they were trying to throw each other under the bus. Now, here's what Comey tweeted last night in reaction to the Barr interview. He says the AG should stop sliming his own department. If there are bad facts, show us, or search for them professionally and then tell us what you found. An AG must act like the leader of the Department of Justice, an organization based on truth. Donald Trump has enough spokespeople. Now, Bill Hemmer asked the Attorney General what he thinks of James Comey. Here's that response.
James Comey has a lot to say about you. He recently said that you've lost your reputation. What do you think of him?
Well, I've noticed one of the talking points these days is, oh, isn't it a tragedy? You know, Barr is losing his reputation, or his legacy is being tinged because of his service in this administration. I don't think those people are really concerned about my legacy.
Things have certainly turned around in Washington, Judy.
Yes, they have. I mean, Bill Barr, when he was initially appointed, because he had been an attorney general, the Democrats breathed a sigh of relief and said, oh, someone who knows the Justice Department, someone who will protect the Justice Department and not serve as the president's lawyer. Now, of course, Democrats are deeply disturbed by what they hear and see from Bill Barr. But I think that Bill Barr hasn't changed. If anything, Democrats ought to be disappointed in Bob Mueller and the Mueller report, because it did not come out the way they had anticipated. It did not say that the president or anyone in his senior staff had kind of colluded with the Russians. So here we are. I mean, I think that until we get to the bottom both of the investigation into Russian spying and the origins of that investigation, this issue is going to remain partisan and divisive. We've got to have a report that satisfies everybody in terms of the facts, John. I'm not sure we're going to get there, but I think that's what Bill Barr is trying to do.
Very quickly, one Republican has jumped on board the impeachment train. Justin Amash, Republican from Michigan, who our Chad Pergram describes as something of a contrarian Republican, says that contrary to Barr's portrayal, Mueller's report reveals that President Trump engaged in specific actions and a pattern of behavior that meet the threshold of impeachment. So he becomes the first Republican voice crying impeachment. Interesting times in Washington.
Yes, he does.
Judy Miller. Judy, thank you.
He does, and he also, by the way...
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Quickly.
He also says that Bill Barr misrepresented the Mueller report. So these are rather serious charges.
Judy, thank you. In part 2 of our investigative report on human trafficking, survivors shed light on how victims are coerced into a life of abuse. That's still ahead on the Fox Report. Investigative series into human trafficking. We heard from survivors and got a sense of the horrible abuses they've suffered. Tonight, we delve deeper into a specific issue. How do people get trapped in this abusive trade? We'll hear from one of the victims who was first trafficked at just the age of 10. Viewer discretion is advised because of the sensitive nature of this report.
A lot of people would purchase me out of the meat store. Sometimes I would have to have sex with them in the meat store.
Edie Rea is a survivor. Her teenage years were largely spent being sold for sex by her mother's boyfriend.
Every day. From 10 till I was 17.
Like many others, Edie's story began with abuse at home.
I would go to school. That was my safe zone.
Edie now works with other sex trafficking survivors in a Tampa Bay area safe home that houses up to 6 women at a time.
He loved me and told me that I was his little girl and that he would be with me through anything. Then it went into him kissing me. And then sexually abusing me.
There are estimates that for one girl being sold every day for a year can make $250,000 to $300,000 tax-free for a trafficker.
Kevin Malone, a former general manager for baseball's Los Angeles Dodgers, became a sex trafficking victims advocate. He was called into that line of work when he witnessed a child being trafficked overseas.
You have 2, 3, 4, 5 girls, you're making 7 figures.
Vulnerable underage teens are often targets of traffickers who manipulate their victims, gain their trust, and force them into a life they didn't ask for.
I think part of the problem is America has turned their head. They have blind eyes to this.
I was in a room with 15 men passing me around the room at 15 years old, raping me every which way you could imagine.
Brooke Bello runs a Florida-based anti-trafficking organization. Like the people for whom she advocates, she too survived being trafficked.
And I remember staring at the ceiling. I hate stucco. It was a stucco ceiling. If I see stucco, I cringe. The first man that purchased me, I thought, are you the guy that's gonna, like, can't you see I'm just a kid, don't you know? I couldn't even find the words.
Bello knows firsthand how easy it is for runaway teens to be trapped into a life of sex abuse.
It was like I wasn't even there anymore. And that was my life for a couple of years.
Essentially, you have this guy who's been trained in how to manipulate younger kids.
Children who frequently run away or have previously experienced sexual abuse are especially vulnerable targets for traffickers.
They're looking for the kids who didn't have a stable home environment, and he will groom her for up to 6 to 9 months to a year, acting as her boyfriend. And so for her, she falls in love with him because he's the first guy to ever tell her that she's beautiful or that he loves her. But at a certain point in time, he will flip a switch and he will tell her, you now work for me.
They're smart about what they do, and they know what to look for. And those things are people who have been abused in the past.
I remember looking at myself in the bathroom mirror and seeing how I was covered in bruises and my eyes were bloodshot.
Kylie Gregg survived 4 years as a victim of sex trafficking. Her traffickers used hollow promises and exploitation to force her into sex work when she was only 10 years old.
They know how to swoop in and kind of take advantage of that. The majority of cases are you're trafficked by somebody that you know and that you trust.
Next week, we'll focus on the anti-trafficking efforts of law enforcement at both the local and federal levels. And if you or someone you know is caught in a trafficking ring, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. That's 843-5678. We'll have more news in a moment.
We're changing laws as rapidly as we can get them through the courts.
Steve goes inside policy with the president. Watch the exclusive interview Sunday.
Pope Francis highlights the importance of a free press in a meeting with more than 400 journalists of the Foreign Press Association in Rome. The pontiff praised foreign correspondents for their coverage of a variety of issues and was quick to denounce fake news and clickbait headlines during his address. Amy Kellogg reports on this from Rome.
The Pope today gathered members of the press based in and around Rome for a sort of pep talk, words of encouragement, words of thanks for the work that news crews do in and around the world, often in dangerous places, and for a blessing, though that part he did in silence, with the acknowledgement that people in the crowd included all faiths and perhaps no faith. But the result, he said, we should all consider ourselves and our loved ones blessed, which is a pretty nice way to wrap up the week. The Pope played off the fact that the Foreign Press Association in Rome is based on Via dell'Umiltà, or Humility Street, and he said journalists should endeavor to be humble, to seek the truth, to not become megaphones for the loudest voice out there, and that without doubt the press around the world must be free.
Freedom of press and of expression, it's an important indicator of the state of health of a country. Let's not forget that one of the first measures of dictatorships is to take away the press freedom or to cover it up, to not let the press be free. We need free journalism, serving the purpose of truth, of good, of honesty, a journalism that will help to build a culture of togetherness.
He warned of the poison of fake news, hateful language, and the vast damage that can be done by that. The Holy Father asked all of us not to forget any wars and certain groups who drop from the headlines, like the Rohingya and the Yazidi, who have been subjected to so much abuse in recent times. The Pope told us all to keep in mind that the Church respects the press, even when reporters, he said, quote, put their finger in the wound, and that wound includes the ecclesiastical community. John?
Amy Kellogg reporting there. Amy, thank you. A stunning victory out of Australia, where Prime Minister Scott Morrison and his Liberal coalition have been re-elected. A shock result that has defied opinion and exit polls. In a triumphant speech, Morrison stated he had, quote, always believed in miracles. After defeating Labour leader Bill Shorten in an election analysts described as unlosable for the Conservatives. Shorten has stepped down as party head following the devastating loss. A new Waters World is coming up tonight, just an hour after this program. Here's Jesse with a preview.
Day 9 of the sex strike. We're going to bring you the latest. Also, politically incorrect movies under attack, gossip about Greg Gutfeld, and a presidential candidate is in Waters World tonight.
Jesse, thank you. And flying cars could soon become a reality. Details on these all-electric aircraft coming up.
For most watched town halls, we're on Fox News Channel, and the highest rated town hall on Fox News Channel. Now, all eyes are on Pete Buttigieg. Don't miss as Chris Wallace moderates the must-see Buttigieg Town Hall, Sunday.
Today is Armed Forces Day, a day on which Americans honor those who have served in our military. It was begun in 1950 by President Harry Truman, who wanted communities to be more educated about the military and the role of service members. President Trump tweeting out this picture, saying, "Today and every day we must acknowledge and celebrate everyone who wears our nation's uniforms." New video now showing an electronic billboard in Times Square going up in flames. You can see it here. It happened earlier this afternoon. The New York City Fire Department containing that fire in less than an hour. The flames did not spread to any nearby buildings, and nobody was hurt. An all-electric aircraft could soon have you feeling like George Jetson. Take a look at this flying car. German startup Lilium announced Thursday its first test of the all-electric aircraft. The five-seater has 36 electric-powered engines. We're told it can reach speeds of 180 miles an hour. The company hopes to have it flying in cities worldwide within the next decade. And that's how Fox reports on this Saturday, May 18th. I'm John Scott. Thanks very much for joining us. I'll be back here tomorrow night, and we'll see you then.